I've been skeptical of XIII since August, when they first announced the show's staff. And it was particularly strange because neither the director or the animation studio had ever worked in anime before. At the time, someone asked if I thought it would be like Berserk 2016, but even that comparison doesn't fit. Berserk was the result of a failure during production. They'd spent so much time on trying to determine what the show would look like that they ran out of time to make the actual show. And in that team, there were plenty of experienced people who saved it from becoming worse than it actually was. But XIII was doomed from the start. Once they chose this direction, it was a failed project with no chance of repair. And that's why I find it bizarre that anyone funded it, let alone Crunchyroll.
Don't you give up now, you have made your vows. You might not know how, but you will find the key. Feel your soul arise from that spark in your eyes. Watch it come alive, this is your destiny.
Before they found a director, the producers had already decided that the show was going to be a 3D anime. This is fine on paper and it makes sense. There's a lot of mechanical assets that would have to be done in 3D anyways, so a full 3D show would mean that it would all look more natural. But their next thought is perhaps the root of all of these problems. The producers decided that instead of finding an anime director, they would instead select a live-action film director to create the show, believing that they would understand the 3D environment better. Except this has no basis in reality at all. Directors who mostly work with 2D can make for excellent 3D directors. Land of the Lustrous was directed by the director of Love Live. High Score Girl was directed by the guy who did Little Busters. Hell, the next Spider-Verse movie will be directed by the director of Legend of Korra. These skills are transferable. The main part is that they understand how animation works. Enter someone who doesn't understand how animation works.
Hello, I don't want make it out of bed.
I mean that literally. When Psycho-Pass brought on live-action director Katsuyuki Motohiro, they gave him a co-director who would be able to translate all of his ideas into animation. But XIII's director Yoshikatsu Kimura was left in charge, and since he didn't really know how to make anime, he didn't follow any actual animation production process. Kimura is known for his work on the film Karate Girl, a kind of amateurish martial arts movie on a budget. He believes that his entrance into the anime industry meant that he wouldn't be tied down to how things are usually done, and so he could bring something new to the medium. One point is that he'd be able to bring in his experience with a camera, but not only are his films not particularly well shot to begin with, but there's a world of difference between handling a real camera and a virtual one. He believed that his experience in live action would help create impactful scenes that would feel extremely realistic, and he strives for a show where all the images feel seamless, citing Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse as his inspiration. And honestly, I feel like I'm going fucking mad reading his interviews. Did he know what show he was making? Instead of the handcrafted look of Into the Spider-Verse, XIII relies heavily on motion capture, with it being used for every single action scene. So they create all these scenes together in a motion capture studio, send that data off to an animation company, and then they attach that to the model. And then, that's it, right? It might not seem that weird until you understand that motion capture generally doesn't look that good raw. Sure, it might be alright for virtual YouTubers who are doing the whole thing live, but it's inherently going to feel uncanny in an animated show. This is why you need animators to not just be part of the process, but leading it. Before the show aired, they announced the action director for the series, and this was a good sign. An action director on an anime is usually an experienced animator who will design the style of the action for the series, and hopefully get all of this under control, so I was hopeful. until I looked them up and realized that in the case of XIII, their action director was Takehito Ochi, a stunt coordinator. It's very clear that the team didn't care so much about what happened in the show, but rather what happened in the studio. Ochi and Kimura worked together before when Kimura served as director's assistant on the Arjun live-action film. Both of them are martial arts people at heart, and so when Kimura invited him to work on XIII, Ochi joined the project with his team of 6 stunt actors at A-Tribe Stunt Group. Together, they donned motion capture suits and performed the action of the show. And honestly, it was probably really cool. These guys are professionals on plenty of action films and music videos, which meant that this is one case where an anime probably looked better behind the scenes than in the actual final product. People have a habit of saying that anime that looks bad is low budget, but no matter how awful XIII looks, this process isn't cheap. Hiring out a motion capture studio and a team of professional stunt people is an extra expense that most anime won't shell out for. Even at Square Enix, most motion capture is done by the animators themselves. When they need to get professionals in, like for a complex dancing scene, they will. But even the largest game company understands that it's better if animators record themselves acting out a scene and then head back to their desk to adjust those movements. This is what I meant by saying that animation must lead the process. And so the question is, did XIII have great animators on staff to transfer the work of expert stunt actors into jaw-dropping animation? No. In fact, the only thing jaw-dropping about it is the way they animate the faces. I mean that literally, the faces aren't animated at all, so they have a singular bone controlling the jaw, which they'll push up and down to show the character speaking. So this means that all of the expressions of the original manga have disappeared, and when they're tasked with creating a kiss between two characters, they took the bizarre decision of covering up the lack of animation with a bright white light. Behind that, there's 2 blank faces clipping into each other. This is something they managed to kind of fix in episode 3 with a close-up, and they've had a couple more goes at it, but it still feels utterly bizarre. Due to the simplicity of the animation, character faces are kind of stuck like that, meaning that any attempt at having them show emotion is kind of a bad idea. The animation studio for XIII is Visual Flight, but even that description is misleading. Visual Flight generally don't make animation. They have animators on staff, but the bulk of their work is modeling and environments. In fact, one of their biggest claims to fame is their environment work on Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. But beyond that, their credits are kind of bare, especially when it comes to animation. Visual Flight is a studio based in Japan, formed by Chinese expats that allows them to work on both Japanese and Chinese productions. But instead of valuing them for who they are, a great modeling and design company for realistic works, they were entirely misused on XIII, meaning that you have incredibly stilted animation with random glitches for talking scenes while having bizarre shaky motion capture for the fight scenes. I'm not sure which part is worse, but what is worse is that it's not consistently stiff. Hair moves, but only sometimes. The breasts jiggle, but only in this one shot, not when she's sprinting or fighting or anything. But it's clear that there are people in this show who understand the process and can deliver good work, even if it's just for a second. And here's the thing, this is a stain on their records. If you're a work for hire studio, you have to keep taking work wherever you can get it. But from now on, they're the XIII team, and it's not like they were given expert support either. The director of the first episode also has no anime credits, while the storyboard artist has only been credited for the 3D anime Francesca Girls Be Ambitious in 2014, which barely moves to begin with. And that somehow wasn't the weirdest decision, because the storyboard artist for episode 2 is Radius Corporation, a company that has nothing to do with animation. Instead, they're like an IT support company and they make like manuals and stuff. It honestly doesn't feel like it was much of a job, since this episode is just impressively unimpressive, filled with uncomfortable zooms and random split screens. It's such a strange production that the fact that episode 3's storyboard artist has worked in anime before is a surprise. They're literally the only creative staff member who has, having worked as an animator on Yowamushi Pedal in the past. And it's actually the best storyboarding in the show so far, but of course there's so many structural issues that one person with experience can't fix it all. And they weren't even able to get all the characters in XIII modelled to begin with, instead having characters that would only appear a few times drawn in 2D. Now this isn't hugely uncommon. Beastars did the same thing, but the difference here is that the visual design of Beastars was so strong and consistent that it's not off-putting, and the compositing team is able to blend the dimensions together. This is the result of bringing on digital compositors with over a decade of experience in the industry. For 3D series that are trying to replicate the look and feel of a 2D anime, you need people who understand the look and feel of a 2D anime. The job of compositing involves taking each of the layers, including the animation, backgrounds, and digital effects, and bringing them all together neatly so they feel like they exist in the same world. I've interviewed both the compositing director at Ufotable and for Sword Art Online Alicization in the past, and both of them were very clear that an understanding of the animation process is essential. XIII's compositor is Ryo Tomizaka, and as you might expect, he's never worked in anime before. From what I can tell, he's more of a generalist, having set up a now closed design company a few years back, and now works alongside the show's editor in a partnership called Varnux. But much like the rest of the staff, he was clearly out of his depth here. If you're going to do VFX within a 3D environment, then it needs to exist within that space, but most of XIII's effects are just stuck to the camera.
モラウ様、失礼します。お飲み物、ここに置きますね。
Plus, the fog effects that's on every action shot is insane. And even when the camera pivots about, the effects don't change, it's just an overlay. And instead of trying to make effects that fit in with the style of the show, if you can call it a style, there's literally just a video of real fire in the background here. And that's just the VFX, but even the most basic compositing decisions feel strange. At best, it struggles to keep up with the rest of the action, but at worst, it's fucking hilarious. When XIII first showed us how bad it really looked, there was a lot of comparisons. People compared it to Ruby or a PS2 game cutscene, but this is nothing like either of those. Ruby started out as an independent low-budget production, and even when there were lows, there were jaw-dropping highs. And there are plenty of PS2 game cutscenes that hold up today. Final Fantasy X came out in 2001. There is no precedent for XIII. They had the money to bring on well-known voice actors and an entire stunt team, but it didn't make the show any better. None of this was a freak accident. You can't blame COVID for the whole thing. And the blame lies squarely on the leadership. Director Yoshikatsu Kimura wanted to make an anime, but he was left alone to try and do it himself, without any knowledge of how anime is made or anyone to ask for help. What did they think was gonna happen? The show was funded and co-produced by a bunch of companies, including Shueisha, Crunchyroll, and the Japanese TV station BS Fuji. And producers from those companies made the decision that a show created by a director who had no idea what he was doing and an animation team that would rather be making maps for the next FromSoft game would be an anime worth making. If there's a lesson to be learnt, it's this. Executives and producers at these companies need to have a working understanding of how anime is made. And not just the process, but the conditions as well. What it's like when someone asks you to do something that you've never done before with no guidance. What it's like to crunch to an unreasonable deadline. What it's like to have to put out a subpar product despite knowing you could do better if the brief wasn't so terrible. These companies have dragged the mangaka, the animation studio, and the stunt team's name through the dirt. All because somehow they didn't understand that this was a bad idea. Thanks for watching The Canipa Effect. There's plenty of great shows this season. SK8, Wonder Egg, Mushoku Tensei if you can tolerate the protagonist, ReZero, Slime, Log Horizon's back, and I'm here talking about goddamn XIII. You're welcome. But before I go, I'd like to thank the people who pay for this torture. In particular, I'd like to thank Austin Hardwick, Dedameat, Edwin Shale, Frizzy Canadian, Frogkun, Jacob Bosley, JR Pictures, Matthew Grunsel, My Own Mother, Nolan Soga, Quentin Elkin Smith, and That One Artist. For more videos just like this, please consider visiting patreon.com/thecanipaeffect.